Insights channel. Steve here, and today I'm going to talk to you about something remarkable. Now, I've touched on this topic before, but not much. I want to talk to you about how that it has been found all over the world, remarkable buildings that people have been lied to as to who built them. And I'm talking about all the buildings in the 19th century as mentioned by the powers that be and by the main media as to who built the buildings. And now we're finding out with investigation that no, a lot of the so-called famous massive buildings, and they're all over the world, they weren't actually built by modern man. Simply, we don't have the technology, neither do we have the building ability. And in some cases, some of the structures built to just defy explanation altogether. In general, what is found by modern archaeologists, scientists, is that a lot of these buildings are far too big for us to build. The structures are too artistic. These buildings are very beautiful, very colorful, and they're just being made out that we made them in modern times, blah, 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 blah. When in fact you find out they're ancient buildings, they're very old. They've been there a very long time. Not only that, these structures, they're practically indestructible. The buildings man makes, they look like kids' toys in comparison. Even all the skyscrapers and all those buildings, like I said before, they look ugly in comparison to these beautiful structures that were created only God knows when. Of course, there are questions we still want to find answers for. My question would be, well, if it's true that some of these structures are from thousands of years old, and I would even go as to say maybe they're from pre-flood times, because we know what went on in pre-flood times. We know that you had the fallen angels down here, and their sons the giants, and their sons the giants had all kind of powers. And what I noticed this time, seeing an excellent video, I'll put the link to the video right at the end of this little talk. Amazing video scientists and archaeologists have made, and others pointing this out, the exact things I'm telling you today. Absolutely incredible. The question is, how did they get away with it? But then there's a good question there again, how they get away with anything. The main media is always controlled by the powers that be, and they're always spouting out for whatever the powers that be, whatever their dictum is for the day. But I'm finding as a historian in studying things like the Second World War, the First World War, and the times before that, how that we've been lied to. A lot of things are not true, and a lot of things simply don't add up. Things that are impossible. I was seeing some amazing pictures today. Where we're showing some of these fantastic buildings. Some of them look like some of these big cathedrals you see. And some of them look like even more amazing than cathedrals. But that sort of size we're talking about. The question is, who really built them? Were they built by people like Sir Christopher Wren, who's given the credit for building a big cathedral? Or are we not being told the truth? You see, let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, each of us only lives a relatively very short time. 70 years, 80 years. We don't live very long. I mean, I can think two people I knew really well. Actually, this year, 4 people I know really well all died. Some of them younger than I am. And that's just how life is. You are only given a short time here. And I believe God in His wisdom, He's made it that way. It wasn't always this way. I believe what the Bible says. I believe that one time there was Adam and Eve, and Adam lived to be 930, his wife something similar, and his descendants, according to the King James Version of the Bible, until the flood, they all lived round about, like Noah, to round about 900. But after the flood, something happened. Something totally changed. So much so that God promised man would no longer live to be 1,000, but his age would be 120. It didn't happen right away, but over hundreds of years it did diminish down to 120 from 900. And eventually it diminished even more in the next 1,000 years to only about 70 to 80 years old, as it has been for the last 3,000 years, as it is today. I think history is incredibly interesting, especially if you study Bible history. But there are some things in history that are very odd, for which we're trying to get explanations. My question would be, okay, if it's true there are lots of buildings all over the planet that we can't really explain, beautiful buildings, by the way, much more beautiful than what we built, or what modern man claims to have built. Oh, they claim they built all those cathedrals all over the world and all these wonderful buildings, but did they? Or were those buildings actually there long before we were here? Those are the questions that need to be answered. But then I was thinking, wait a minute, if we believe the Bible story, and we believe in the Great Flood, and we know that before the flood, yes, there was some questionable activity going on with fallen angels and giants, and they built incredible places. And I would take it further than that. I'd say, personally, I really believe that the earth is hollow, and for good reason. The earth is hollow, and that man actually started on the inside of the earth, general mankind, along with Noah and Adam before him. And they started on the inside of the earth, and you can see that clear if you read the books of Enoch. The description of what it's like in his time. It sounds more like a different place than here. Anyway, I believe there was an inner earth, and that sort of cradled and protected mankind, rather like a womb. In the second Esdras, it describes the earth like a womb. Yes. So you had like the inner earth like a womb, but the earth was very, very different back then. You not only had the inner earth where man started off, but in the outer part of the planet, it was surrounded by water, or canopy of water, around 100 miles up, the scientists say, because that's where you'll get gravitational forces and centrifugal balance out. So there was protection around the earth, and that protected us from UV. That was probably the reason why people lived to be 900 years. But that was all taken away at the flood, and that's why within 500 years man's age had gone down drastically, down to about 120,000 years later, down to 70, 80 years old. Well, that's documented from the Bible and from the Apocrypha books. You can see these facts really clearly. The big question is, we know from the books of Enoch that God told the fallen angels who had messed up the whole planet and caused so much trouble, so much death and destruction, and created the giants through women, or the licentious daughters of Cain, I might say, and they gave these giants to end up being cannibals and devouring mankind. It was a horrible time to live in those last 500 years before the flood. So anyway, God destroyed it all, and he told the fallen angels through Enoch directly, you're not going to be forgiven for this. No. Not through all eternity. You're not going to be forgiven for this. You're going to end up in the lake of fire. That's what's happened to you lot. Now, since God wouldn't forgive them, it said they couldn't even look up to God. They couldn't even behold his face anymore. Right. So what were they supposed to do with themselves? They know, we can't go back up to heaven or the spirit world, so what are we going to do with ourselves? Well, apparently the fallen angels, along with their sons of giants, they decided to build some advanced civilizations on the outside of the planet. And actually they started doing this long before Noah and the 8 souls with him came out from the inside of the earth at the time of the flood. By the way, you can prove these things very easily in different ways. One of the ways you can prove how the Noah traveled a fantastic distance in a relatively short time was the way it describes the flood. You know, we know the flood went on for a year, right? But if you look at the descriptions of Noah and his trip from books like 2nd Esdras, you find out he traveled amazing distance in that time. Now, how is that possible if man was living on the outside of the earth and there was a flood there in the middle of the world, and then they floated around for a while, and as others brought out, they didn't go too far during that flood? But you can prove from apocryphal books and that, and from the Bible, oh yes they did, they traveled a very, very long distance. About the distance of going from the inside of the earth to the outside of the earth. And what I find most amazing, others have said that the inner earth is a reflection of the outer earth. I don't know how that's possible because they don't have the same sort of land masses on the inside as on the outside. Some facts I do know is that it is stated in the books of Enoch that originally it was only 1/7 of the planet was water and the rest was dry land. Of course, the other way around now it's 80% or more seas and only 20% land, and of that only 3% is actually still habitable. So our planet today is a far cry from what God gave Adam and Eve and what the people in pre-flood times had. Having said that, if it's true that we still have buildings around on the planet today, and I'm not just talking about ruins, we know we have some of the strange structures and the pyramids, and they're not just in Egypt, by the way, they're all over the world as well. We know those are impossible for man to build. Absolutely impossible. You can prove that mathematically, scientifically, physically. So they were built in pre-flood times. First of all, the pyramids. But that's not the only buildings. Then you've got more relatively modern-looking buildings. Well, not modern, say, as in the last couple of hundred years, but these are beautiful structures, as you'll see in things like ancient cathedrals and stuff like that, that they claim we built in fairly modern times, the last few hundred years, or for the last 400 years, you want to say, and yet you find it's not possible. Why is it not possible? Number one, the giant size of the buildings. Number two, and this stuck out to me today, investigating this, do you know a lot of those ancient buildings that we admire in traveling over the world as a tourist and seeing from South America to Italy to Portugal to the United States, where is you go, to Moscow, these amazing buildings that we have been taught was built fairly recently, say in the last few hundred years. Then we find out scientifically, mathematically, that is not quite possible. And archaeologists will tell you themselves. Mathematicians will tell you. Scientists will tell you. And the thing that stuck out to me today, when we were showing some of these gigantic, amazing buildings, and they are beautiful, I admit that, very incredibly beautiful. In fact, there isn't a square meter on a building that hasn't got something beautiful and artistic and it sticks out, you know. He said, wait a minute, we don't build structures like that. We don't build buildings like that, are so artistic. And yet modern man has tried to claim that, oh yeah, we built those in a couple of years and then we decided to destroy them a couple of years later. There's something not right there. Who would do that? Why would you waste the time? Why would you waste the money? And I was learning today, do you know there's not one city in the United States that hasn't been destroyed at some time or other by fire? And that in the 19th century, they deliberately got rid of a lot of these old structures. Probably the ones that they could no longer explain, or was they couldn't no longer use. You'll find a lot of the structures I'm talking about, they've been used by the governments of this world. You know, it could be a House of Commerce, it could be It could be the government building. It could be a House of Justice. You name it. All these really fancy buildings that are used by this world. Were they really built by them or not? Or does when they were built, actually from a much longer time ago? Now, there are certain things that stick out. These two things stick out to me about these amazing buildings. Why is it, answer this question, why is it that a lot of these buildings have doors in them that are 50 feet high, 40 to 50 feet high, when we're only 6 feet high? What used to live in those buildings? And why are some of those buildings being constructed so you could have an audience of 450,000 people sitting inside the building? And that's one of the ones in the United States. I didn't know these things till very recently. I didn't even know they had structures like in the United States. And here's another one. You got a picture of some of these amazing, beautiful structures and interim nice roads like to a city like that. But there's not one person living there. Taken from hundreds of years ago, I think 1820 or something. Not one person living there. In other words, the structure was not built in modern times. It just was sitting there. Okay, fair enough. That could be. But then I would ask the question this. Now wait a minute. If we stick to the flood, say being about 4,500 years ago, if the whole world was in a giant flood and everything underwater, would buildings like that have survived? How could they survive? And even if they did, were they not at some time buried under sand or dirt or earth or something? So how come we can see these buildings now? Well, that is a very, very good question, but I want to bring to your attention, I have seen something like that myself in person. Here in Scotland, we found some amazing structures here that are from that time period too. But they're only now just starting to come out of the ground because of erosion. They were covered in sand, they were covered in stuff, but erosion has blown away all the sand and the dirt, so you start to see these structures that also defy explanation. I talked about them in one of my videos some years ago. You know, where they got one stone on top of another, but not like the way we would build in modern times. These are like 10 tons each, and then sometimes you get smaller stones underneath and bigger stones on top, and even bigger on top of them, something we'd never do. It's almost as if those who build these structures were not limited by gravity. And I think that's another factor. How could somebody build such massive structures as there are all over them, including the pyramids, but including other incredible buildings? How? I think it's because in the pre-flood times, you had the fallen angels and directing their sons, the giants. On top of them, they had probably millions of slaves. Millions of slaves, using mankind as slaves. But not only that, they had the ancient ability of anti-gravity. And that would explain how it's so easy for them to build. Plus, they obviously had very artistic people who could design such beautiful windows and beautiful structures and beautiful walls that are really actually pretty to this day. You know, it is staggering. There's a great contrast between these type of buildings, whenever they were built, for that matter, whether I'm right and they were built in pre-flood times or later, I don't know. But they are different than the way we build. And it was seen that they had a technology far more advanced than we to do, as is evident with the pyramids as well. Well, anyway, I would like to suggest to you, please do listen to this video. You'll find the link right here under this little talk here. I think you're going to find it fantastic to know these things. As to how could there have been buildings like that? You have to see the size of them to realize how difficult it is to build things like that. And like I said, just ask the architects, ask the mathematicians, ask the real scientists that are honest, and they'll tell you there's no way we could build stuff like that. It's too big. It's too big. And why are the doors 50 feet high? They've had to put little doors inside these giant doors. He said it's almost as if giants used to live there. There you go. Well, there were giants before the flood. And of course they had all the technology advancement of their fathers, the fallen angels, and everything they knew. So I think because the fallen angels weren't forgiven, weren't allowed to go up to heaven again, decided to build themselves some sort of paradise down here, but they messed up real bad until God had to blow on it all with a big flood and drown it all out. But over these thousands of years, what was covered in stone and rock and sand, like I've seen here in Scotland too, the same thing, has been eroded, so you can see these ancient structures, many of which just is hard to explain because they even defy gravity. Anyway, I hope you find this interesting. I encourage you, please listen to this audio. I was very impressed with the video link. This one I watched, I found this incredible. And I think you will too. Of course, it stirs up a lot of questions. How? When? Who? Anyway, thanks for listening, and I would encourage people, do please get hold of my books, Insights books, starting with Enoch Insights, my latest one, Secrets of Enoch Insights, based on the second book, Enoch. Then you got Josh Insights, book 1 and 2, Jubilees Insights, Eden Insights, based on the lost books, Adam and Eve, Testament to Patriarchs Insights, and Esdras Insights. That's 3 books in one. And then you got 2 books on the paranormal, supernatural, talk more about the things like I talked about today, Out the Bottomless Pit, books 1 and 2. And I would encourage you to go on my new website, which is www.insightspublication.com, and feel free to write to me at any time at activatedscotland@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.